All right, I'm going to go ahead and start the broadcast and read my intro.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's 60-minute presentation as part of the webinar series of Wednesday Rainmaking by the Women Rainmakers of the American Bar Association Law Practice Division. This webinar is being recorded. My name is Carole M, and I am the Marketing Specialist for the Legal Technology Resource Center. Questions will be addressed after the presentation. Please enter your questions using the questions box in the webinar panel on the right side of your screen. We will try to answer all of your questions, but if we run out of time, there will be space on the evaluation form to ask additional questions. Please note that there is a PDF copy of the slides which can be found in the Handouts tab located under the questions box on the right side of your screen. If possible, please address your question to the speaker who you wish to have answer the question. Please assist our Women Rainmakers Committee by taking the time to complete the evaluation, which will be emailed to you immediately at the end of the program. This assists us in developing future programs. We really welcome your input for future programs. Our moderator today is Carole M. Carole joins us today from New York City, where she is a partner in the Trust and Estates Practice Group at Moses & Singer. In addition to her involvement with the Women Rainmakers Committee, Carole is an active member of the ABA Real Property Trust and Estates Law section and serves as Vice Chair of its CLE Standing Committee and as Co-Chair of its Non-Tax Issues Group. She is also a Fellow of the American College of Trust and Estate Counsel. Thank you all for joining us. We'll now begin the webinar.
Thank you, Gabriella, and we thank all the rainmakers around the country who have chosen to learn more about business development for aspiring and new partners. The mission of the ABA Women Rainmakers is to educate professional women about marketing and business development, to provide mentoring opportunities for members, and to provide networking opportunities to build personal and professional relationships. You can find up-to-date information regarding our initiatives and programming by visiting the ABA Women Rainmakers homepage. Today, we are fortunate to have two wonderful speakers to provide insight on business development for aspiring and new partners who want to become future rainmakers. Today's speakers are Cordell M. Parvin and Andrea Anderson. Cordell Parvin practiced law for 37 years and developed a highly successful national construction law practice. Cordell worked on some of the most complex construction projects in the United States, representing several of the largest U.S. contractors. For 25 years, Cordell also wrote a monthly column for Roads and Bridges magazine and became the go-to lawyer for transportation construction law. During his law career, Cordell taught, mentored, and coached young lawyers in his law firm on their career development and client development. In 2005, Cordell left his law firm and began coaching associates and junior partners in law firms throughout the United States and Canada. Over the next 13 years, Cordell coached over 1,500 lawyers, helping them achieve their individual career and client development goals. In 2018, Cordell began recruiting lawyers. He places lawyers he knows in law firms that he knows. Cordell continues to coach motivated lawyers. Cordell posts regularly on his blog, www.cordellblog.com. He also has a video client development coaching program available at no charge through the blog. Send Cordell an email to get the copy of the workbook. Cordell has written 3 business parable books, a textbook, Prepare to Win, and ebooks on career and client development. Andrea Anderson is a partner with Holland Hart, LLP, based in Boulder, Colorado. With more than 20 years of trademark experience, Andrea manages the trademark portfolios, clearance, and enforcement programs for the owners of several of the world's most valuable brands in the technology, travel, and consumer product spaces. Andrea has been identified by Managing IP magazine as a global IP star and is one of the top 250 women in IP for many years. She is ranked in Chambers and the World Trademark Review and is the recipient of Lexology's 2014 Client Choice Award. She began her career in private practice with a large intellectual property law firm in Washington, D.C., and prior to that, she attended George Washington University Law School, where she graduated first in her class. After law school and before entering private practice, Andrea clerked for the Honorable Raymond C. Clevenger III, Circuit Judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, which hears all U.S. patent appeals, as well as appeals from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office's Trademark and Patent Trial and Appeal Boards. She and her husband, Paul, enjoy skiing in winter and hiking in the summer in the beautiful Colorado mountains. Thank you both for joining us today. We are excited to learn more about business development for aspiring and new partners.
Thank you, Carol. This slide, I want each of you to think that you're each an individual with a different practice, a different part of the country. But the way to get the most out of this hour is to think about what is my takeaway for a plan for profile building, for relationship building, and how will I implement it. And if you do that, you're going to get the most bang for your buck for the hour. So go ahead to the next slide. One of the really great questions that we received prior to the program was, you know, where do you start on a business plan? And what I like to tell lawyers that I've coached is you need to plan long-term, but act short-term. So if you see this slide, I think it's really important to think what you want to accomplish. And I try to put it a few years out. So in this case, 5 years out. Next, you have to ask yourself, why is it important to me to accomplish that? And the reason you have to ask is if you don't have a good answer to the why question, when you're not achieving results right away, you're likely to give it up. The mountain is a high mountain to climb, and you got to take a step at a time. So what do you want to accomplish? Why it's important? When you know the what and the why, the how comes very, very creatively. And so that leads you then to your yearly plan. And so you'll have a plan template that I use that you can use to start your planning process for the year. In that plan, you're going to have goals. What do I want to accomplish this year? But in order to really accomplish it, many lawyers just take a plan for the year and put it in their desk and don't look at it till the end of the year. You've got to break it down into the smallest possible categories. So it could be 90 days, it could be 30 days, or it could be just what do you want to accomplish next week? So I think it's very important to plan long-term, act short-term. So go ahead to the next slide, Carol. Another place to start, find out your top 5 strengths. I know that Andrea took StrengthsFinder when we worked together. Someone asked me, well, how did you use your strengths to prepare a plan? Well, unfortunately, StrengthsFinder wasn't available when I was starting out. I wish it had been. And the reason I wish that is when a senior partner in my firm told me I had to be in the Rotary Club, I would have figured out some way to politely say that doesn't really fit what works for me. When you know your top 5 strengths, you're going to know how to best use your time. So I encourage you at the start, particularly the person who asked the question, you know, plan long-term, act short-term, find out your top 5 strengths so you can go from there. Carol? Andrea, you've done great on your planning. Please share with the group how you do it.
Sure. Thanks, Cordell. You know, I still use the plan that you gave me back in 2007. I'm looking at my first one right now, and it's kind of organized along the lines that you've articulated. The first part is that I do identify a business development goal for the year, and there are many ways to articulate that. And there are several, you know, macro goal and several micro goals. The macro goal, you know, usually is a certain origination figure that I set, you know, and I usually don't meet that origination figure the first year I set it as a goal. I might not meet it the second year as I set it as a goal, but eventually I will meet it. And so there can, and I personally prefer very tangible, measurable goals. The intangibles don't motivate me. So, I'm looking at some of my goals of, double originations by the end of the year, 2 speaking engagements, 3 new clients. Then I also parse out how I'm going to spend my billable and non-billable time and kind of try to figure out, in numbers, what is going to be my billable hour goal? How am I going to divide up my non-billable time among different activities? I'll write down profile building activities I plan to do in the next year, what organizations I want to be more active in, and what exactly my role or activity in those organizations will be. I'll write down, how many articles I want to write in the coming year, how many speeches, what topics. And then I'll also take an inventory of people, connections, and write down kind of all the clients I work with, folks that I need to get in contact with, influencers, media, reporters maybe in an industry that I work in that I need to reach out to and keep that relationship warm. And then I'll write down, what I'm going to do this year, what specific task. And that's about it.
Okay, Carole, next slide. When we were working together, do you remember what your long-term plan was?
Well, I didn't, but you did.
Go ahead.
It was, Cordell reminded me as we were prepping for this presentation that when we worked together, my long-term goal was to achieve $3 million in origination by the time I hit 50, which I am past 50 now, and I met that goal.
That's awesome. Next slide, Carole. And I think that answers this question. That was an incredibly ambitious goal given where you were at the time. So go ahead to the next slide, Carole. So why was that important to you?
For several reasons, it was important to develop clients that I was responsible for managing. The professional reasons were that, I enjoy being the one who's primarily responsible for the relationship and developing relationships with my clients. So, I'm a people person, and I really enjoy spending time and getting to know folks in-house clients that I work with, and getting to feel like I'm serving them, like I'm helping them. That is a huge benefit for me professionally. The other side of it is I also kind of like to be the person who is making the strategic calls, right? You spend most of your life as an associate executing a game plan that a partner comes up with, but I wanted to come up with a game plan, right? And so it's incredibly empowering and kind of a rush to be the one that gets to do that. From a personal standpoint, look, here's the reality. Pretty much any firm in the country, the rainmakers are going to be the ones that are compensated more highly. And for me, that was really important. I'm a sole breadwinner. My husband and I decided years ago that he would stay home with our kids. And I really felt like to honor his commitment to our family that I needed to put the foot on the gas. So those were my motivators.
That's great. Carole? So you talked about setting effective goals. What would you add to what you've already told the audience?
Well, they're the big macro goals, right, that seem so far away, and so, you worry that they're unachievable. I certainly did at the time. I thought I was kind of blowing smoke when I set that goal, as I recall. But I think the micro goals are great, I would have goals like I'm going to double my originations this year. And, that's not a huge stretch. When you've got one banana, you double it and you get two, at least in the initial years, right? But I think it's those, micro goals that you set, 3 speeches by the end of this year, and you methodically work through those and cross them off the list, and that feels good, right? That's reaffirming when you accomplish each of those. So to me, honestly, the long-term goal is great and a good one to have, but I got more day-to-day satisfaction and motivation off of meeting those individual smaller goals.
And that's one of the reasons when we worked together, we created 90-day action plans, because you could cross things off. And when I was coaching Andrea and her group, we would have phone calls in between the in-person meetings, and the first question out of my mouth was, how are you doing on your 90-day action plan? So it was a good way to be accountable. Go ahead, Carole. One of you asked a really great question, how do you get the biggest bang for your buck? And I think someone else asked, what's the most important thing you can do? When I was thinking about this, when I was a younger lawyer, I was intuitively figuring out where the best use of my time was. Now, if I had had StrengthsFinder, I would have had a better intuitive sense of it. But I like to put all of my action plans into these 4 categories: high return, low investment. Do it first, do it often, do it again, do it as often as you can. Carole mentioned that I wrote for Roads and Bridges magazine. I wrote a monthly column for more than 25 years. It was the highest return and the lowest investment of any client development activity I did. High return, high investment. In order to do that, you've got to break it down into smaller pieces. When I was a very junior lawyer, I wrote a law review article for the ABA Public Contract Law section publication, and it took forever. It took close to 2 years. And if I had not broken it down into the smallest pieces of what I wanted to accomplish over a short period of time, I would have never finished it. Low return, low investment. Do it when you have time. That could include things like meeting someone for coffee or a lunch or a breakfast or whatever. Low return, high investment. For me, that was Rotary Club. It was a very high investment of time. They met every single week. They had a fundraising doing bingo, and it was just, for me, a very high investment and very, very, very low return. So learn to say no graciously. So go ahead, Carole. When you do your plan, the first part of it is your client development. And Andrea's gone over a good part of that, but I always feel like my non-billable time needs to include my own development. And even when I was a very, very senior lawyer, I still had in my plan the substantive law that I wanted to be working on, industry and business knowledge that I wanted to be working on, and client development skills. I never felt like I knew everything I needed to know about client development. I was always trying to learn more and to get better at it. Go ahead, Carole. On the client development, I break it down into 2 categories. You'll see this on the business plan template. One is profile building, and the other is relationship building. One of you asked what I thought was a great question, and that is how much time on profile, how much time on relationship. And what I shared in the answer that I wrote is when I was a junior lawyer, it was probably 80% or more on profile building. People need to know who you are. And so I put my time there. When I was a far more senior lawyer, I probably spent 80% or more of my time on relationship building. And that relationship building started with the clients that were already clients. It was incredibly important to me to maintain their trust and to keep them as clients. And so, next slide, Carole. Andrea, you talked about some of your 90-day action plans. Can you remember any others or ones you're doing now?
Oh, sure. I mean, one I'm doing right now is it's time for me to work on my business development plan for next year. Our statistical year starts in September, so I want to be identifying goals and coming up with action items for things I'm going to do in the next year.
Great. Carole? So the way, remember I've mentioned I plan each week, and in the old days we had day timers that we stuck in our suit pocket, and I actually used those. Today it's so much easier with calendars on your computer. But I think it's important to know what you're going to do, how long it's going to take, and when you're going to do it. Put it in your calendar. There's a professor at Columbia who wrote an article, wrote a book, both a short book and a longer book on success. And she describes two groups of people that she was working with. One group had specific entries in their calendar. If it was 7 a.m., they were going to be working out Monday, Wednesday, Friday at the particular workout facility. The other group didn't have that in their calendar. At the end of the year, 80+% of the first group were still working out Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and a very low percentage of the second group were still working out. So again, I think it's really important to break it down. If I just say I want to lose weight, that's very, very ambiguous. If I say I want to lose a pound a week, and I'm going to do it by increasing my exercise calorie burning and decreasing my calorie intake, I'm more likely to actually stick to it and do it. Next slide. In Andrea's firm, we had a group of, I believe it was 18 lawyers total. And so how did you and your group hold yourself accountable?
Well, we had a group that worked with Cordell as the coach, but we also met independently from the sessions we had with him. And in those sessions, we had to report back on what our activities for the month were. I think those were monthly meetings. So we each had to identify goals, and we actually have a SharePoint site where we all had to write down our action items for everyone else in the group to see. And then we would convene at the end of the month and talk about whether we had accomplished those action items. And honestly, that peer pressure was a huge motivator for me. I did not want to come to that meeting empty-handed. I wanted, a list that had a lot of things checked off of it. That's one way.
Great. Next slide. I think when I was working out regularly, when I had an accountability partner, I was always going to show up at the workout place. In a lot of the groups that I've coached, people team up, and actually it's interesting. I coached several women lawyers from different offices, both in the U.S. and Canada, and they really have never met each other in person. But every Friday, they have a call. What did you do this week? What did you do this week? And it's their own way of holding each other accountable. I think Andrea mentioned something I think is important. When you have a group in your firm that are working together, no one wants to let the team down. And Andrea's firm just really hit the ball out of the park by taking that particular concept. Next slide. Someone asked,
Cordell, can I just add one thing on that?
Please. Yeah, please.
Cordell, I'm sorry to interrupt you. One other thing and tip out there for folks, obviously if you can get a colleague to be an accountability partner that's fantastic, or a mentor. But if you're uncomfortable with that, or if there's not somebody that's the right candidate, those of you that are lucky enough to work at firms with pretty large marketing departments, you would be surprised at how willing and able the marketing folks are to schedule monthly or weekly time with you to sit down and go over your goals with you and to offer great suggestions. I learn things from them every time I sit down with them. So that's one other kind of accountability partner you might seek out.
That's a great idea. One of you asked the question, do you record your client development efforts? And I thought that was really a good question because as it applies to me, for almost, I'd say 3/4 of my career, I said, why in the world am I going to record non-billable time? And it just made zero sense to me. But the last quarter of my career, I realized that if I'm recording my non-billable client development time, what I'm going to do is more easily figure out what's working. In other words, this was a good investment of time. This was not such a good investment of time. And so I started recording it, and I changed my mind. I didn't think it was worthless. Andrea, do you record yours?
I will, usually in preparation for partner compensation and stuff like that, I will pull out an inventory that I keep on a running basis. But do I record it on a daily basis? No, I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay, next slide. We're switching now from planning and motivation and accountability to client development. And when I was a junior lawyer, I was told, Cordell, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And my problem was I didn't know anybody important enough that was going to work for me. And so that concept just was beyond what's going to work for me. I think in 2019, it's not what you know, it's not who you know, it's who knows what you know. And so where do you start with all of that? I think the way you do it, go ahead, Carole, is to be on top of identifying your client and potential clients' problems, opportunities, and changes. Your clients don't care about what you do. They only care about how what you do helps them solve problems, achieve opportunities, and deal with changes that occur to them. So I spent a whole lot of time reading and studying and identifying the problems, and then drawing clients to me by writing the monthly column in the magazine, by doing presentations at industry events, by later in my career doing webinars, writing guides on particular subjects, but creating content. The marketing staff of your firm would call it creating content. Create content, identifying problems, opportunities, and changes. And when you're doing that, someone said to me, Cordell, are you giving this away? I'm giving it away. You know, I gave away guides. I gave away the monthly column and all that went around that. I did presentations. When I was a junior lawyer, I did presentations. I would have gone anywhere for free and spoke to a group of potential clients. And I know, Andrea, you do the same. So share some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I early in my career at your instruction, one of the things I did was develop a booklet about trademark counterfeiting and what brand owners could do, some proactive steps they could take in order to minimize their exposure to trademark counterfeiting. And then to go along with that, I developed a presentation that I did on counterfeiting. And again, just to anybody that would listen, right? I did it to some industry groups, and that went really well. I also did it for the Boulder Chamber of Commerce. And after that presentation, I would offer to send people the booklet that we had done. And, you know, now, honestly, we might be more likely to send it in electronic form. But I would send folks the booklet if they would come up and give me their business card. And that was a great way to start, to identify a problem. And shortly after that, one thing led to another, and I got identified by a couple of reporters in certain industry that wrote for industry pubs as someone who was an authority on counterfeiting, and I got calls about that. So those things tend to snowball.
So go ahead. So I think there are principles of client development, and these principles were in place when I was a very junior lawyer. They're still in place today. But what's changed is the tools that you can use to apply these principles. So to me, this is as important a slide as we're going to have today. You have to be visible That means people need to know who you are. You have to be credible. That means they need to know what you do or what your firm does and that you do it well. That leads to weak tie relationships. Now, weak tie relationships, people wonder what they are. Let me give you a small example. Way back early in my career, I did presentations all over the country on a particular legal subject. And one of the presentations, I was on a panel with a Federal Highway Administration lawyer in Washington, D.C., and I met this gentleman for a grand total of 3 hours while we were on this panel together. Fast forward, I get a call from one of the largest contractors in the United States. I was only about an 11-year lawyer at the time, and the general counsel called me and said, we have this $30 million problem in Atlanta, and we've heard you're the lawyer to handle it. At the end of I was breathing heavy, as you might imagine. At the end of the call, I said, well, how did you find me? And he said, well, we called the Federal Highway Administration. We talked to a lawyer named Paul Brennan, whose name I will never forget. And he said that you're the leading expert in the country on this particular subject. And I got hired. That's an example of a weak tie relationship. I've never seen Paul Brennan before that 3 hours on a day in Washington. I've never seen him since. I've never talked to him since. So again, visibility and credibility and creating content, writing, speaking, being active in the bar, being active in the community leads to these weak tie relationships. Now, the weak tie relationships are going to recommend you. What happens today that's different than it used to be is they're going to do a Google search. The potential client is going to do a Google search on you. They're going to look at your website bio. They're going to do a Google search on the legal topic. And your goal is to be on the first, second, maybe third page of Google of having addressed the legal topic that they're looking to hire a lawyer. Okay, everything up to recommendations is fairly objective. They don't know you yet. Client meetings become very subjective. And the whole goal of the client meeting that you have, the potential client meeting, is to build trust and rapport. If you're able to build trust and able to build rapport with the potential client, you're going to get hired. So those principles of client development haven't changed. Go ahead. You've shared a lot about how you became visible and credible. I know at the beginning when we worked together, you were involved with some industry speaking and writing, and that kind of took off for you. Can you share some of that?
Sure. I live in Boulder, Colorado, as Carole mentioned, which is also where the Trade Association for the Outdoor Gear and Apparel Industry is located. And I decided that at that time in my career, I wanted to focus on bringing in clients in that industry. So I reached out to the executives of that industry, got to know them, or of that association, got to know them, and eventually was able to get our firm on as a sponsor for one of their, it was a smaller meeting. A convention is not really the right word, about 400 attendees, I think, mostly C-level execs from different outdoor gear and apparel companies. And as a part of that sponsorship, we got a speaking slot. And so having that speaking slot in front of those industry leaders was definitely a credibility builder that led to other opportunities. And just like Cordell's situation, I had, as a result of those speaking engagements, they led to additional work. Interestingly, not necessarily from the people in the audience at the time. Same way as Cordell. A funny story is that after one of my speeches, a nice guy came up to me, kind of unassuming. He had a Southern accent like mine, and we got to talking. He was from Tennessee, and I was from Arkansas. Well, it turns out He's married to the vice president of merchandising for REI, the biggest retailer in the outdoor gear and apparel industry, and therefore everyone had to be nice to him. And he knew everyone. And it turned out he was a consultant for a group of outdoor companies located in Scandinavia. You know, one thing leads to another, and 3 months later, I find myself on a plane to Sweden giving a speech to a Scandinavian outdoor industry association, and that actually did lead to some work, and a not insignificant amount, right? So definitely the industry piece at that time in my career was a great one. Another way that I became visible and credible, and one of the easier ways is writing. I think, like Cordell said, that was a way that I spent a lot of my early business development time was working on articles, because maybe they wouldn't be read in the publication when it initially came out, but later when somebody was Googling something, there would be a hit, and I've definitely gotten some calls out of the articles I've written.
Great. Next slide. So you can see that industry expertise played a role in each of our early client development. When I got out of the Air Force and started in private practice, I thought I wanted to be a commercial litigator. And the only problem was there were dozens and dozens and hundreds other commercial litigators in town. When I started to focus on construction, everything changed. I changed how I was spending my time. I like to know a lot about a little, so I focused again on construction and tried to become the expert there. Even those of you who will never have an industry-based practice, and Andrea's practice now is hardly industry-based, but even those of you who will never have that kind of practice, your potential clients, for the most part, don't know whether you're a good lawyer or not, but they know whether you understand their business. So some of your non-billable time, self-development, I would spend trying to understand their industry and understanding their business. So that's where, even for non-industry-based practices, that's the role that industry expertise comes into play. Go ahead, Carole. So how do you...
Hey, Cordell, can I interject real quick? Oh.
Please.
Hey, Cordell, I'm sorry. This is Andrea. I was just going to add that I read at Industry Pub for one of the clients that I worked for, and daily for at least a couple of years. Like every day, I was reading their industry blog so that I could stay current on their problems.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. We used to have Google alerts that I would use that would lead me to the articles. There's bound to be a way that you can find articles affecting the industry of the clients you're focused on. So everything starts with your website bio, and thankfully website bios have greatly improved in the years that we've had law firms with websites. But I think it's really important on your website bio, if you've written or spoken or have content, make it downloadable, make someone be able to click on it and view it. So I think that's important. For those of you with strengths that would cause you to be active in the community, that's where to spend your time. There's a book called Never Eat Alone, which I highly recommend to any of you who have an interest in this area of how to spend time that's not writing and speaking. So, I've coached lawyers. I coached one lawyer who was the head of the YLD for the ABA the year before I coached him, and he probably gets 90+% of his business from lawyers he's known through the American Bar Association. I've coached lawyers who have been active in the community in charitable areas, who have gotten a very high percentage of their business because they're active in the community. I had a partner in our Los Angeles office whose sole way of getting business was being active in charities in Los Angeles. And he became so well known that people were sending him business not even in the field of law that he was practicing. So those of you that fits your strengths, use that time wisely and reach out and get to know as many people as you can. So we've already talked about writing and speaking, so go ahead. Again, you need to create valuable content and you need to write it or present it well. And so, even though I said earlier that I spent less time on roads and bridges, that monthly column was incredibly important. And what was the most important thing was the headline. And the reason the headline was so important is if the headline didn't attract readers, they weren't going to read the first paragraph. So writing and speaking, you need to write it and present it well, have someone review it, give you feedback, and so forth. I never blogged. Next slide. I never blogged when I was a lawyer, but I've been blogging since I've been coaching lawyers. One of you asked about the internet, and we're going to have a slide on that later. The beauty of blogging, one of the many beauties, is the immediacy of getting the content out there. When I wrote Roads and Bridges columns, if something happened today that impacted my potential clients, it would be over a month before the Roads and Bridges magazine would be out there for people to read what I had written. You can blog about it today. And blogs, I tell lawyers, the most important thing of a blog is the headline and the first paragraph, and to get people to read down to the bottom. The thing to remember if you are blogging is your clients don't care about the history of Swiss watchmaking. They just want to know what time it is. And a blog needs to be short, to the point, and I'll just leave it at that. So on speaking, next slide. I tell lawyers that I coach that speaking at particularly an industry meeting or an ABA meeting or any other kind of event, it's sort of like a rock concert. And, at the risk of dating myself, when I was in law school, I went to see the Ike and Tina Turner review. And I also have Tina Turner live at Wembley Stadium. I have both of those on my computer. In 1971, when I was in law school, her first song was Higher, Higher, and her last song before the encore was Proud Mary. So at Wembley Stadium, 30 plus years later, her first song is Higher, Higher, her last song is Proud Mary. If someone asked me to tell you what the songs are in between, I would have no clue. So you need to start with high energy. You have 90 seconds max where people are asking, why am I going to pay attention to this speaker? So use that time wisely. Next slide. We talked about, in fact, this question that you have there was one of the ones we received. And to me, the internet's changed client development because no longer can you say I'm too young or I'm in a small law firm. No longer can you say that because the internet has allowed people to get content that's valuable out there for clients. So I think the internet has what I describe as leveled the playing field. And Andrea, do you have any thoughts on the new techniques?
No, not particularly. I agree with everything you've said. It definitely, you can increase your visibility by different methods. And, the idea is to find the one that works for you.
Great. Okay, so the last part of what we're going to cover, we have 6 more minutes till questions, are client relationships. So go ahead, Carole. I mentioned to you earlier, clients screen based on reputation. Go ahead. Then they have the weak tie relationships we talked about, and they select based on trust and rapport. Next slide. I think it's really important to think about clients care about achieving their goals, and your focus is on how you can help your clients achieve their goals. That's, to me, that's kind of the starting point of client development. And Andrea, I think you've got some thoughts on how you are able to do this.
Yeah. When we first started working together, I was a little skeptical about whether I even was the kind of person that could be a rainmaker or a business developer. And I just wasn't slick. I couldn't sell. I wasn't one of those old white guys that played golf. I just didn't know how I could do it. But Cordell said to me, well, come on, Andrea, can you help people? And the light went on for me. And I said, well, yeah, it turns out I can help people. So my whole approach to dealing with clients is they're first. I am here and my team is here to help them meet their goals, their professional goals, the goals for their company, could even be their performance targets, right? A lot of our in-house clients have performance targets they need to meet. And I try to find out at the beginning of every year, hey, what are some of your performance targets that we can help with? And it's incredibly fulfilling to do that. And when you do that, when you place your clients' needs first, above the needs of your firm, above your personal needs, they begin to understand that you have their back. And you enter into a trust-based relationship that, for me, is the most rewarding part of what I do.
Great. Next slide, Carole. So Andrea's talked about building trust, and Andrea, you've mentioned to me that one of the greatest times to build trust is when something goes slightly wrong. And why don't you share your thought on that?
Sure. You know, in any business relationship, there are going to be misfires. There are going to be problems. Things will not go exactly right. Your firm may bobble a matter or an issue. It's going to happen. And of course, lawyers hate that. I mean, we're trained that there can't be mistakes. We must be perfect. Well, that's just not realistic. But I've found that when those mistakes happen, the first thing you do is you own them. You take full responsibility for your part in this mistake. Now, it may have been an honest miscommunication between you and the client, and it's totally okay to name that, right? But then, you know, you go a step further, you own the mistake, and then you tell the client how you're going to fix the mistake, because the reality is that 99% of the mistakes that occur in our daily practice are in fact fixable. And then you don't charge the client for the fix. And when you do that, it will put you probably in, 1% of all lawyers that are willing to be that transparent, that authentic, and that real with clients. And that after that happens and you go through that with them, they will trust you even more, because they know, that you're going to get it right almost all the time, but in the few times that it doesn't go quite right, you're going to fix it and you're going to own it. And that's just huge.
I agree. Next slide. So building rapport, I think, is taking a genuine interest in your client representative, being interested in them as people. I want to know, how many children they have, what they do when they're not at work. I want to build a relationship just like a friend. And I used to tell lawyers that my clients were my friends and my friends were my clients. And to me, that was part of building rapport. It's taking a genuine interest in them. So go ahead, Carole. So what the idea is to exceed expectations. And so in order to exceed expectations, you have to understand what the expectations are. Once you understand that, figure out a way to exceed what the client expects, and you'll have a client for life. So the final 2 slides before we take questions. I tell lawyers I've coached, you got to have the 3 P's: patience, perseverance, and persistence. When I decided I was going to focus on construction law, I didn't have a client for over 2 years from the time I started creating content, including the law review article for the ABA. And I had to be patient. It just isn't going to happen overnight. So that's part of the reason the whole accountability thing is important. And so our last slide is kind of a summary of what we've covered over the last 50 minutes. Prepare a plan with goals, find a way to stay accountable, become visible and credible to a target market, build those relationships, improve client service, and just keep repeating the above. And Carole, you said we need to be finished by 1:50. My clock says 1:50.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Cordell and Andrea, for all that great information. We have some questions, and we have a few minutes for Q&A. If we don't get to your question, feel free to reach out to our speakers. Their information is on this slide. So Cordell, some of the questions that we received have to do, specifically with navigating within your firm. So for instance, we got a question about new partners in firms where most of the clients are institutional and they're already deeply attached to another partner. Do you have any ideas about how to deal with that?
I coached a lawyer in Washington, D.C., and he had the very same question. His firm had probably, in the field he was in, his firm probably had, if not the #1 lawyer in the country, certainly in that top category. He said, how do I get out from under the shadow of the giants in my practice area that are in my own firm? And I said to him, you have to do something they're not doing. And he said, well, give me an example. I said, well, why don't you create an internet radio show? Now, this was over 10 years ago. I'm not sure the same thing would work today. Well, literally over about a 3-year period, he had a weekly internet radio show. And finally, those giant partners wanted to be on his internet radio show because it was so highly thought of. And he literally quadrupled his volume of business. So one way to answer that question, which I think is a really great question, is do something the senior partners aren't doing. Many senior partners have quit doing client development, and so do something they're not doing. Another way, in fact, I wrote this in the answer, is create a sub-niche within the niche. And so I was mentoring a junior lawyer in my firm, and she said, I don't know where to start a business plan. I said, well, suppose you were the best in our building on Ross Avenue in Dallas in this particular subcategory. Do you think people in our firm would come to you when they have a problem in that area? And she allowed us how they would. And finally, I said, well, suppose you're the best in all of Texas in this sub area. So another way is to create a sub niche within the niche. Any other questions?
Yeah, that's great. I think we have time for one more. And someone asked how to bring up partnership track in a firm where there's not a specific set track. How do you raise the issue?
Andrea, what are your thoughts?
I haven't lived that situation, so I don't know. But well, in general, there is no specific track for partner anymore, right? Generally, when I first started practicing, it used to be 8 years, and you were considered. But the business has changed. I think opening a dialogue with the partners you work with and asking questions and understanding what to them is important in determining who can be a partner in the firm. What do you think, Cordell?
Well, first of all, what you just said is exactly what I would say. You know, when I was a partner, if someone came to me and said, I want to become a partner in our firm, can you share with me how to do that? I would tell them, I mean, first of all, I'd be honored that they asked me for advice, and I would make sure they had a clear idea what's happening. You know, it's so hard to make a general statement about law firms because big, small, you know, city, country, so forth. But what's happening in large firms is the goalpost keeps getting moved. And, you know, in my old firm, to be an equity partner, this is close to 20 years ago, you had to have over $1 million of business originations. And then it became you needed to have $1 million 3 years in a row. So the goalpost keeps getting moved. But to answer the question, there's bound to be someone in your firm that you can say, I want to become a partner, and can you share with me the criteria or what I should be focused on? And that person is going to, in my view, value that you came to them. If you never ask, you'll never know.
Great. Terrific.
Yeah, and this is Andrea. I would just add, oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Oh, I would just add, if you're in a larger firm, I would definitely talk to a variety of people. I wouldn't just talk to one person, because you would be surprised at how, if there aren't, you know, set in stone criteria like $1 million of originations, you'd be surprised at how different partners look at it differently. And a lot of that depends on when they entered practice. So, you know, how long they've been practicing. And a lot of it depends on what their practice is like, what group they're in. You know, are they a litigator versus a transactional lawyer? So I would definitely not confine that question to one partner if you were working at a larger firm.
Terrific. That's great advice. And thank you both so much for this wonderful webinar. And thank you to all our listeners. We sincerely appreciate your interest in the webinar series. So please stay on the webinar, as Gabriella mentioned when we first started, to give us your feedback. And please feel free to reach out to either Janie Lee or myself if you have any questions or suggestions for future webinars. Please join us on September 18th and on December 11th for our next two webinars. The September webinar on the 18th will feature a panel of coaches responding to questions from our participants. And with that said, we wish you very successful rainmaking in 2019, and we hope to see you on September 18th for the next webinar. Thank you, and here's to your successful rainmaking.